So our panel today is about folks who are transitioning from Eleventy, meaning they have done that on a project. Just to clear up a point of confusion, they're not dev advocates or representatives from the companies that they were listed from. It's just the environment that they have moved from. So I'm going to go kind of around the view that I see on my end and ask each of our panelists just to do a quick introduction of yourself and go ahead and share which environment you transitioned to Eleventy from. So Raymond?
Hi, I'm Raymond Camden. I'm a developer advocate for Adobe. I transitioned from Jekyll, from Hugo, from WordPress, and from custom blogware I wrote in Cold Fusion. So it's been through multiple separate engines.
Nice. Next, Veronica.
Hi there. My name's Veronica. I am a self-employed person doing mostly server stuff, but also some tech content creation and a little bit of web design. And so I've mostly been on WordPress, just mainly because I inherited WordPress sites from the servers that I manage, and that's kind of where I got my start going. But more recently, I've been diving into Eleventy for internal docs for some of my customers. I actually generated Eleventy from COBOL, which was kind of exciting, using COBOL as a data source. So that it can do just about anything you throw at it. Oh, I see people in the chat. Yeah, I'll talk about COBOL at some point, but yeah, it's fun. Yeah, it's so great in my world that, you know, I'm interested in trying it for everything at this point. So that is where I'm at.
Awesome. Benjamin, your introduction, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Benjamin Andrew. I'm a professor at Penn State University, and I teach visual art and design, including a web design class, but it's mostly to art students who don't know how to code. So I myself am not really a dev and have just, you know, self-taught a lot of this stuff over the years. And I've used WordPress a lot for freelance projects for myself and for clients. And I've started using Eleventy more and more for sort of like one-off project sites, and recently finished converting my own personal site from WordPress to Eleventy.
Awesome. Salma?
Hi, everyone. I'm Salma. I currently am a developer experience engineer at Netlify. And last year, I was a developer advocate at Contentful. And at that time, there was a big market in our developer community for Next.js and Contentful content. So last year, I got really heavily into Next.js. And because I was just so used to it, every single new project I spun up, I thought, oh, just do Next.js, do Next.js, do Next.js. And I'll talk a bit more about later about what that did to my brain. But I've been doing a lot of work around accessibility and performance and how the two are very interlinked. And I was getting frustrated with the lack of performance at times from a Next.js site. And I just joined Netlify, and Netlify is sponsoring Eleventy. So I thought, what better time to get into Eleventy and see what it's all about? And I've never looked back.
Awesome. And last but not least, Montique, if you would go introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Montique Stevens. I am a freelance web developer based in Brooklyn, New York. For my personal site, I ended up moving it from Gatsby to Eleventy probably about more than a year ago. I found it to be more easier for me to deal with. I've also built a few projects with Eleventy outside of my own personal site, and I found that the learning curve for that has been much easier for me.
Awesome. So I love the variety of environments and also the variety of, you know, relationships to the web at large, and how you, you know, different skill sets of being developers. So I appreciate everybody joining us today. So we just have about 6 more prepared questions, and I'll just ask that the panelists go ahead and comment when you have something to share. We're a little bit later with our technical difficulties with the first half, which is fine. So I completely understand if anybody has to drop off, but we'll go about 25 more minutes and try to get questions answered. And if we have time, we will watch for questions in the chat. So go ahead and add them there. If we don't get them answered, we can post them on the Eleventy Meetup Twitter later. And if panelists would like to help weigh in as they're able, we can try to follow up that way as well as in Discord. So our next question for anyone, how did you decide on Eleventy as the environment to move to? I know some of you had kind of winding paths to get there, but yeah, whatever you'd like to share.
I'll say for me, being on Jekyll, knowing that Eleventy supported Liquid meant that I could reuse the same language. Now, I have to admit that ended up being a double-edged sword because I wasn't aware that Jekyll added stuff to Liquid and that Eleventy was a bit behind in terms of their Liquid engine. But that was my primary reason. That, and also it was Node.js space. Jekyll being Ruby, I never enjoyed installing Ruby. Once it was installed, it was fine, but that was very painful.
I had actually built a couple of Jekyll sites many years ago, and I kind of liked that Eleventy was pitched as the JS version of Jekyll. If for some of you who don't know, Jekyll is built on Ruby, and I thought, great, I know JS, I'll use this. And contrary to that, you don't really need to write any JS, which is interesting. You know, similarly with Jekyll, you don't need to write any Ruby. But I was attracted to the fact that potentially I could contribute to Eleventy because there's a thriving community around it and it's built in JS and I know how to write JS. So that was one of my deciding factors as well.
Anyone else like to share?
I wanted to move to it from WordPress to static sites because it's simpler and faster and consumes less energy and is cheaper. You know, I wanted to stop paying for shared hosting and dealing with all of that. And I messed around with a couple different generators, but liked Eleventy because it was, to me, the simplest. Since I don't know a ton of JavaScript, it felt very comfortable for me to just be writing HTML and CSS and learning about nunjucks and some of these more advanced things as I went along.
Awesome.
I can just jump in. I had a very similar experience as Benjamin with just my own personal experience with JavaScript was less. And, you know, my being a sysadmin and, you know, being in like legacy systems and COBOL and stuff, it was the jump from, you know, like what I learned as a, you know, youngster doing web stuff, you know, as like a teenager, I didn't know, I hadn't really kept up on all of the changes in JavaScript and all the stuff that had happened and the framework races and all of these things. And I tried Hugo and I found it to be, it didn't click with my head very well, but then it just, Eleventy was just so simple and it was just so streamlined compared with what I had experienced in other things. And I just kind of stuck with it. One thing I will say too, that I from a security standpoint, I've been able to actually sell it to customers now. My first customer said, let's switch to Eleventy. So I'm actually going to be doing a live website in Eleventy, which is exciting. And they said that based on, I gave them a presentation comparing it with the WordPress security vulnerabilities and all of the processes of getting WordPress clamped down and nice and tight. And I did a cost comparison and they were sold. So that's the stuff that I think is selling it and certainly worked for me.
Awesome. Very good. Yeah, go for it.
I found that Gatsby was just as difficult to use as React when it came to like building out projects and adding more data to them. I found that the build times was like very slow for me for what I wanted just for a small personal site. So I figured, you know, if I jump on Eleventy, that would streamline everything that I wanted to do, of course. Um, Especially with like, I had issues with like GraphQL errors a lot with Gatsby. And I also found that the community, there was more of a larger community around Eleventy, and there's like a lot of more people that are willing to help you if you get stuck on anything, more so than with Gatsby. I had an experience when I was trying to solve a particular hop swapping issue. And I found that no one was willing to help, or the answers that they gave was like very vague. So that's what really propelled my push to transition my site over.
Awesome. Well, I won't take up time, but I will say that I came from both WordPress and a little bit of Gatsby, and I definitely empathize with some of the reasons that were shared. And it's great to hear that you're already seeing benefits from the community. So our next question, again, anybody who wants to answer, we certainly, if you feel comfortable answering and things, but what were the first steps you took to move to Eleventy? We're here to hear your very personal experience, so it's okay if it didn't go well.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with Next.js, it has a very, very opinionated way of structuring applications. What I loved about Next.js was the file routing. So you just add a file into the pages folder and you have a page. So I tried to recreate that architecture and I was successful in the end. But where I kept falling short was I kept thinking there was an Eleventy way to do things. So if there's a Next.js way to do things, you know, Eleventy, I thought at the time Eleventy was a framework, but now I always tell people it's a build tool because it's not really a framework. It's just you can do whatever you want with the files. You can put them wherever you want and run whatever you want in whatever way you want, and you can make static files. So I was really trying to transition from one thing to another by making it the same and trying to replicate that architectural experience. Through doing that, I realized that you don't need that huge architecture for every single project, especially for a blog site. It was for my blog site. And whereas I still do have that kind of organization of, I have folders with an index page in, and I get the data for that specific route with an Eleventy.js data file. Because I did everything in JS as well, because I thought, well, I don't want to go straight to Nunjux or Liquid because I want to write JavaScript like I do in Next.js. And so the thing that it taught me was that I actually can do whatever I want and learn the best way for me, rather than following the patterns that are set out for me by X number of developers who have built the thing. And so it was very freeing. And it brought me back to basic web development and not being constrained by patterns. But it took me a few weeks to really understand the freedom I had with Eleventy, which helped me build it in the way I needed for my purpose for every individual project.
Awesome. Anyone else for this question?
This reminded me that I have a spreadsheet comparing like 12 different Eleventy starter sites that I like went through and like made notes on the features I liked, and it was just hard because, you know, you got to really stick your head into someone's code base and figure out like how they're arranging things and what gels with your process. I think I followed some tutorials to start from scratch and like build out some basic stuff, but then I definitely wanted to see like my favorite starter sites, which I ended up kind of combining elements of a couple of those.
Yeah, that sounds like a really cool way to go about it. There's definitely pros and cons to the open architecture. I have a brain that loves it, but it is kind of one way or the other, it seems like. Anyone else? Yes, Casey says, please blog that spreadsheet or bring it as a talk. Well, if there's something, oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I'll just add, so just using Eleventy was super easy. The thing that concerned me was ensuring that my URL stayed the same, because I'd gone through a couple of generators, and I wanted to make sure that my traffic wouldn't dip because I changed things. So I know at some point I went from having 0 padded months to not having 0 padded months, and I have to make, I wanted to make sure that persisted. So I think like the biggest hurdle I went through initially was just ensuring that what came out matched precisely what was already running on Jekyll.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, when you're literally moving a former project, then yeah, all those little concerns kind of can add up. Well, if you think of anything else, you can tag it on to an answer later on. But we've kind of actually dove into this one a little bit. But anything else you want to share on the biggest challenges, but most especially, how did you get help? Montique, you mentioned the community already, but yeah, just anything around those challenges and how you resolved them.
A big part of me getting help was building this in public on my Twitch stream, and that attracted. So I didn't join the Eleventy Discord straight away because I used to have as minimal Discord rule as possible, because they can get very overwhelming. And so I did a lot of this learning in public, building in public, and getting some feedback and being able to talk through the problems to people as I was building it. But I'm going to echo the sentiments that have been said about the Eleventy Discord, because no matter what time it was, as soon as I went and posted in the help channel, I had someone to help. I was never left hanging, and everyone was really nice and explaining it in, you can get some Discords or some communities that are very, that they're very non-understanding about new developers to a thing, asking questions, and they can assume a lot of knowledge, and they can be a little bit mean. But I didn't experience that at all in Eleventy, and I've stayed in that Discord, and I don't normally do that.
Yes, very good. I'd highly recommend it for folks that aren't in the Discord yet. We'll get that link in the chat if you haven't joined us yet. That it is definitely a great place to be, and also keep up to date on our meetup. So.
I have a challenge. It's in terms of big challenges that I wouldn't mind just throwing it out there, because it's something I've dealt with, which is, with WordPress, which is where I'm mostly coming from. There's just so many plugins, and that is not always a good thing. And I make that point with customers, but you do get that, will it work with my so-and-so, whatever, like with me and the most recent site I spun up, it was, will it work with my drop shipper? And, it can, but you have to, work things out. That's, in my mind, the biggest challenge that, I face when I'm discussing it. I would love to know what other people have done about that, and just have, like, this might be a topic for a bigger conversation. Just what do we do to, build out that infrastructure, that ecosystem?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And yeah, folks in chat, if you have any suggestions on that. But yeah, it'd be a fun discussion to have.
I was going to provide a strange answer. Well, I was going to provide my stock answer to that. Is one of the things on the journey that I learned through going from Next.js to Eleventy is you probably don't need it. So I had a lot of stuff on my old site just because I was experimenting and learning and creating content for people using Next.js. I added far too much nonsense to a very simple blog site. And I mean, I think even if it's not a blog site, and even if it's a product site or something else site, I think there's a lot of things that you think you need initially, but there are different ways around it. There are more creative ways around it. And, what Benjamin was saying about his big spreadsheet, potentially you don't even need a spreadsheet. Maybe you just need one little thing here, one little thing there. And then I used to be a tech lead, and clients used to say, we want X, Y, Z features, but actually sometimes the problem would have been solved when you've just released feature X. And so it's about looking at it in terms of usability and functionality. And I think Eleventy encourages you to do that, because you can't add a million billion plugins like you can in WordPress, and which is by default improving the user experience and the performance as well.
Yeah, really good points. I think that it's nice that there's a way to add plugins so we can all share some functionality, but I would say, yeah, that in general, that's a lesser known feature. And I would agree. We want to, all be cognizant of how that really goes into the future development of Eleventy. But that's just my opinion. So, again, if you think of more later, but I want to make sure we kind of get through a few more perspectives here. So, sort of the flip side of that, what do you wish you knew before getting started with Eleventy? What would have helped you avoid those challenges, or things like that?
I'll just repeat what I said about Liquid, not knowing that Jekyll had added its own filters and stuff to it. That's all very sensible now, but I never thought about it because in Jekyll it just worked. So to me, that was Liquid. So in Eleventy, I thought it was maybe the exact same, and not knowing that that tripped me up many times. I got very familiar with it. Don't go to the Jekyll docs. Actually, go to the Liquid docs to see the exact syntax and make sure you're on the right version that Eleventy supports.
I wish I'd known that it's probably better to start out with Eleventy using Liquid or Nunjux or Markdown rather than going for JavaScript files everywhere. And I think it's because I was trying to replicate the patterns in Next.js and React components and very atomic little pieces. Everything in my code is a JavaScript function, which is okay. But actually, I think the code can probably be a bit more simple, be a bit simpler again, by going back to some of the basics of what makes Eleventy so good. And I love the fact that there was JavaScript because I had a really good way into it. I think maybe I would have been a bit more hesitant if there wasn't that JavaScript template option. But a couple of other Eleventy sites that I have built since, such as Women of Jamstack, I am using Nunjux files and just static JSON, which felt so much simpler. So I don't want to refactor my blog all again, but I think the JS approach is a good midpoint, but I think I should have just been braver and started with the default.
Anything else to share? It can be really like niche and micro too. I think that's the things that are coming to mind for me are kind of on that angle. So, I mean, the templating language thing was huge because you're not only switching templating languages, but as Salma has mentioned, the architecture discussion there. So if that helps anybody think of something that they would have liked to know. Thomas says they've become a huge Nunjux fan just because of Eleventy. And I think, yes, eventually all roads lead to Nunjux.
One thing that it took me a while to kind of wrap my head around was how to approach collections for blog posts or projects. And in WordPress, I often had like custom post types that I would create through the PHP functions. But I tried various different ways of doing that in Eleventy, and ultimately the easiest seemed to be to just use tags to group various post types as opposed to having like different folders of post types that, I don't know. Somehow the language of tags was confusing to my WordPress brain, where tags work a little differently. But I did really enjoy the freedom of kind of inventing your own front matter properties and being able to pipe that data in to lots of different places.
Yeah, awesome. Anything else for this question? Cool. We'll go to number 6. Are you happy with the transition? I know at this point, several of you have done more than one project. So any regrets, you can also tie in, will you keep building with Eleventy? Anything around that?
0 regrets. I actually wrote a really long blog post. It's a 10-minute read, so it's a heavy one, about all of the ways that I improved performance on my blog site, moving from Next.js to Eleventy. And it also drove home some important conclusions that I've been making for a long time, that design is performance as well, and architecture is performance, and those things are also accessibility. You know, and everyone's always talking about how, oh yeah, Eleventy gets me 100 across the board on Lighthouse, but it's not really Eleventy. It's just because it's static files, right? And then you can be really, really purposeful about the client-side JavaScript that you add to your Eleventy project. And that was the most beautiful thing. Like, when I was looking at my Next.js project, there were like 33 JS files loaded on a page that that wasn't needed, and because of all of the prefetching and the hydration and the blah blah blah. But now there's like 0 JavaScript by default, and that's the key, because it's just a build tool. Just give me my static files and go away. And every single piece of JavaScript I put on the client is purposeful, and that's also really powerful. You feel so much more in control. I think I've become a better web developer. I've become a more thoughtful web developer. Like, everything, it's just taught me how to build for the web in a performant way. And Eleventy has given me like power, but because it doesn't really do much. And that's the key.
I always say it's my enabler. You get started, and I 100% identify with those feelings, and you just kind of keep rolling.
I love it. One thing, I forget who said it. I didn't come up with this, but somebody said performance is ethics and performance is ethical. And the idea of making a website perform quickly and with less on the client, with less on the customer, with less on, that is an ethical statement in itself, just as much as, not using tracking cookies and not, all of that. And I find that to be so important. And I find that to be like with this customer I was just working with, it's an important selling feature. They want to be able to say, we are acting ethically on behalf of our customers when you visit our website. We are minimizing the amount of server needed for this. We're minimizing the stuff we're putting on you and on your device. And it just so happens it's going to work much better at 3 o'clock in the morning on a 4G phone when somebody needs to contact the client. But I think that's a really important thing. And that is a thing that makes me really happy about using Eleventy as a tool over WordPress. I mean, I like WordPress. It's fun, but it's heavy. This is less heavy. And I love that.
Awesome. Yeah.
I have no regrets about it. I feel like for me, using Eleventy and having like more control, like Salma was saying, just having more control over what you're building, it just allows me to focus on writing more clean semantic code, and I truly love it. That's the whole thing about simplicity, and yeah, it's great.
I feel like a lot of people have talked about the flexibility, but it needs to be said a lot. There's nothing that I feel like I can't do with Eleventy. It may be hard, but it'll definitely be possible. One of the reasons I left Hugo is that I remembered like I wanted to output JSON, and I thought that won't be a problem. And it was really hard at that time. I've stopped using Hugo for a long time, but I felt like it was fighting me on what I could output. Whereas Eleventy is like, I don't give a crap what you out. You do whatever you want. I'll have a plugin, or I'll have a way of doing that. I really, really appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing your perspectives today. I think we're down to kind of our last big discussion question. What advice do you have? So, I mean, bits and pieces of advice have definitely come out in the conversation so far, but anything specific, especially in light of the environment you journeyed from?
Don't try to recreate your previous environment in Eleventy. Just go with Eleventy, start from the beginning, don't be afraid, forget everything you know about a big previous framework and just build static files.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's nice about transitioning a site or rebuilding or redesigning is the opportunity to sort of clean house and get rid of old crap you don't need and sort of figure out new ways to do things, which for me was a fairly time consuming process. You know, I didn't just like instantly convert it from WordPress to Eleventy, but I was happy to have that opportunity to sort of optimize and make better choices in the design system and all that. And I'm just like publishing straight from markdown files, but again, sort of enjoying the sort of manual control over everything instead of working with the CMS. But the Netlify CMS has been pretty nice to use for some projects.
I would say take your time, read the docs. If you're transitioning from another environment, you don't really need to try to recreate that. Just think outside the box and just try to make another version of it and figure out how you can make it even better than your last project. I would say that's what worked for me. I also, you could take your time. It took me probably a few months to really get everything situated from Gatsby to Eleventy. And I would say that that I was the better developer for it. Like, so yeah.
Awesome. I'll pipe in 2 cents. Coming from both WordPress for a decade of my career and then a couple of years with Gatsby, I would say, just kind of breaking those previous mental models. You don't have to make everything a layout right away if you're WordPress, and you don't have to make everything a component if you're coming from Gatsby. You can build up to those. That's my favorite feature of Eleventy is even project to project. I don't have to. I learn from each time I build one, and I carry some things forward, and I reassess and maybe choose a different, more appropriate method depending on the project. We do have a couple audience questions that I think will be kind of quick for anybody that would like to answer. What was the most surprising thing you gave up client side, if you came from a client side, in your transition to Eleventy? Or did you feel you had to give up anything?
That's the thing with Eleventy not forcing JavaScript on you. I didn't have to give anything up at all.
Nice. I think we heard a lot of perspectives of maybe change was actually a positive for your experience. So getting rid of some things was maybe the best choice at the end of the day. Another audience question, how do y'all like the CSS setup you have in Eleventy versus those other frameworks?
I am using Sass to compile to CSS in Eleventy, but again, it's not an Eleventy thing. It's just a bunch of files that during the build create a CSS file. Before that, I was using CSS modules, and that was fine. I was able to componentize my CSS per component, but I can now do that with Sass. And with a lot of, how I can't speak. The way I start my new projects now is I just have a static CSS file because that's all you need. And again, there's no opinionated opinions around how you do styles in Eleventy. You can do what you want. You can use anything you want. And again, it's not a framework. So for example, with Next.js, CSS modules is built in. So you kind of might as well use it. But Eleventy gives you more freedom, gives you more choice. You don't even have to have any if you don't want it, or you can just add a style tag and use the inline plugin CSS, blah, blah, blah. There's just choice and it's not opinionated. And that's what I like.